Yesterday, as I'm sure you know, Donald Trump signed an executive order aiming to slash federal funding to PBS and NPR as he alleged bias. The order instructs the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the parent, and other federal agencies to, quote, cease federal funding for NPR and PBS, and further requires they work to root out indirect sources of public financing for the news organizations. We're joined now at the BPL desk by Susan Goldberg, President and CEO of GBH. She's here to tell us if we'll have a job on Monday. Susan, it is very good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Okay. Yep.
Thank you.
There is a lot of concern, needless to say, Susan Goldberg, but tell us what this means for PBS, for NPR, for GBH, for everybody under the big umbrella.
Well, so this order came down at around midnight last night, came out overnight, and really the CPB is contending, and it makes a lot of sense, that he has absolutely no authority to say that the CPB cannot give away this money, because the CPB is not an agency of his administration. The CPB is a private nonprofit corporation that was authorized by Congress in 1967, and it was set up like that to insulate it from politics and from congressional changes. You know, every 2 years everything changes. So it was set up to be separate, and it is not an arm of his administration.
But we collectively may end up having to go to court. I know the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, I believe, is in court over his attempt, Trump's, to dismiss several board members using the same argument. I mean, our side using the same argument that he has no power to do this, right?
That is correct, but I believe the CPB has 5 sitting board members, and they are meeting today to talk about exactly what has just happened. But, you know, this is just one of the fights that is getting waged right now. I believe, as you were broadcasting, the administration just submitted its budget. It zeroes out the CPB, which they do actually have the right to do that in the next budget. So that will get fought out, all through the summer. We have been expecting there to be a rescission package put forward, meaning that they were going to try to claw back the 2 years of funding that have already been authorized by Congress that goes to the CPB. And of course, there's the FCC challenge to PBS and NPR.
You know, just to be clear to people without burying them in legalities, virtually every lawyer, we called a lot of people, including Judge Gertner this morning, former federal judge, totally agrees with the arguments being made by the lawyers and you for our organization. And while the consensus, other than in the administration, is Donald Trump can't do this by executive order, Congress could do anything they wanted to do with these funding. And when the testimony, I can't remember if it was the head of PBS or the head of NPR in front of Marjorie's favorite congressperson, Marjorie Taylor Greene's committee, a month or so ago, made the point that how it's not only funding critical for all of us, but particularly for smaller stations around the country whose residents are totally dependent on NPR or PBS as their primary news source, no?
This is absolutely true. I mean, not everybody in the world has access to broadband. This is broadcast television and broadcast radio that 99% of people in the country can reach, and it is free.
What would happen to us? Obviously, we have many other sources of funding. GBH, what would happen to GBH if Trump was successful here?
There will still be GBH. Of this I can assure you. And we are still going to create the programming that we create now and our fabulous local news operation.
You know, Marjorie and I met with our boss, our newsroom boss, right after all this stuff started recently, and Dan Lothian, we said, so what are we supposed to do? And almost verbatim, he said, exactly what you've always been doing without a change. However, and that was really heartening, I know, for our whole team, we have seen some heretofore really powerful institutions in law, in media, and academia go on bended knee to Trump to try to cut a deal. Is CPB or PBS or NPR of the mind that they should reach out to the Trump administration and see if some, quote, deal can be reached?
I can't speak for any of them, as you well know, but I would just say that certainly based on their public statements, they believe what we believe, which is we've got to keep doing the important work that is essential to our communities. And as you know, here at GBH, not only do we cover local news for the local community, but we create programming that goes all over the country. You know, 5 big national programs that most people don't even realize we produce here in Boston, everything from Frontline to Antiques Roadshow. And it goes all over the country, and we're going to just keep doing that work. I just have to brag for 1 second, if you will let me.
Brag about TV, too.
All right, I'm going to brag like crazy. So we were nominated for 18 Emmys yesterday.
Wow.
10 for Frontline. It's fantastic. 10 for Frontline, an incredibly nationally and internationally important investigative documentary program that also won an Oscar last year. 6 for American Experience, the longest running history show on television. 1 for Nova, a 50-year-long wonderful science show that so many of the scientists in the world tell you why did they become a scientist? Because they were watching
Yep.
Nova. And 1 for a show we were just trying called Deadlock, which is trying to bring people together from all political viewpoints to figure out how to solve problems. So 18 Emmys, that's fantastic. We were also nominated for 7 local Emmys, and we just also won a Peabody for our work on Masterpiece, which we also produce right here in Boston. So our content, it's needed, it's wanted, it's indispensable, and I couldn't be more proud.
Well, I think that they were mad because we suggested apparently the make-believe clownfish in Finding Nemo would have been better off as a female. That seemed to have put people
By
over
the way,
the
that is part
edge.
of their argument.
Yeah, and we
for
ran a
whatever
Valentine's feature around queer animals, but that made them crazy. But what do you say? I mean, Republicans prior to Trump had been after NPR and PBS for a long time. They've been complained about it for a long time. It always manages to prevail. But their big complaint is that we are biased and we are intolerant. We are not fair in our reporting. What do you say to those people?
Well, I patently disagree, and I think the audience does too. When you look at who watches our programs, about a third of the people identify themselves as being liberal, about a third say they are independent or somewhere in the middle, and about a third say that they are conservative. And that is true for our major programming, no matter what. I think it's also really important, though, to talk about kids' programming. This fills an incredibly important niche. And what worries me is, while the president may not have the authority to tell the CPB to stop sending out money, he does have the authority to tell the Department of Education to stop sending money to public television. We get millions of dollars from the Department of Education through a special program called Ready to Learn, and it finances the research that goes into our children's programming. So we're not making kids programming to sell sugared cereal, right? We're making kids programming so parents can safely put their children in front of a television, and they can learn to read, they can learn to do math, they can learn to have good social skills. And half of the kids in the country don't go to pre-K.
You know,
That's
speaking
right.
of kids thing, I don't know if you happen to be listening this day. We had a guy who's a hardcore Republican, former chair of the Mass Republican Party, who went on to become head of USAID, Andrew Natsios. And a day or two before, he'd been quoted in the New York Times in a story, and this is almost a verbatim quote: "Nothing has done more to defeat al-Qaeda and forces like that than Sesame Street," which we all know where it all started. And he meant it seriously, and he explained it in the most beautiful way about the message that is conveyed as compared to the other ones.
Well, it's absolutely true. And just yesterday, we premiered a new kids show called Acoustic Rooster, which uses the principles of jazz, of improvisation, of letting other people have a solo, of sort of sharing the stage to help kids not only appreciate the music, but how to get along and get things done. I mean, I wish all adults would watch Acoustic Rooster, too. And it's just coming out.
But
Obviously,
it's
leftist
something-
propaganda.
But something you
Susan
mentioned
Goldberg.
about not having commercials for Fruit Loops and chocolate chunk cereal and that kind of stuff, that makes a big difference. Because we all remember, those of us who had kids, when your kids were little and they watched commercial television, they saw these commercials, and then the next minute went to Star Market or Stop and Shop, was this long harangue about Fruit Loop cereals and all these things. They don't see those commercials, or for certain toys you don't want your kids to be lusting after. They don't see those, and that's a big deal when you're trying to bring up children. You don't have a big fat wallet, or you just don't want to store your kitchen with those foods that are very bad for your kids.
Well, that is true, but they also really learn things. I mean, that's where those ready-to-learn grants go, and it's millions of dollars that helped us create Work It Out Wombats,
Yeah.
which is a show we've got on now about computational thinking, right? How to solve problems one step at a time. And it also helped us create Molly of Denali, which is focuses on helping kids learn how to read. And it is the only show out there ever featuring an indigenous character as a Native American indigenous character as the main character.
You know, you and other leaders in this operation have, in my opinion, a pretty difficult job, because it's not just legally fending off what are arguably illegal or unconstitutional actions by the administration. This is really stressful for people who work here and work in small stations. I mean, we read all these stories with Doge hanging over everybody, even places that weren't shut down, even workers that weren't fired, worried about what the prospects are. What do you think about that while this all pens and hopefully this is a successful outcome? What's your responsibility in terms of the stress and anxiety that people feel when you're under the gun?
Well, I think the first thing is to acknowledge it. It is stressful, and it does make people anxious. And look, the media is a complicated business and has been so for decades. But I do think that this is a new level of threat. We've got a free speech threat. We've got a funding threat. We've got an ability to make a living threat. What I always tell people is what I try to do myself, which is to focus on the work, focus on how we can make a difference, focus on making that great children's content, focus on making those important frontline documentaries. Go win 7 more Emmys, GBH News, super proud. So I think we got to focus on doing the thing.
How are the donors reacting to this?
Well, we have seen an uptick in our donations. We recently had a fundraising drive for WCAI, our Cape and Islands station. It was 75% over our goal, so I think people are really noticing. But we have just sent out an email, right before I got on the air here, to our member community, telling them about this, trying to educate people about the threat, and telling people what they can do about it.
So that's exactly, since most people haven't seen that, the last thing from me, Susan Goldberg, head of GBH, is what should listeners and viewers who support the work, what should they be doing?
I think you can do a couple things. One is you can reach out to Congress. Congress people, look, our delegation here in Massachusetts is very helpful, but we reach people all over the country, and they want to know what people think. And a lot of these rural and smaller stations are incredibly threatened by this. So tell your congressman or congressperson you don't want this to be canceled. Become a member of GBH. Donate. Help us. And I'd say engage with the programming. What we do is unique in our market, and we reach more than 30 million people a week through all of our programs on all of our platforms. So keep engaging with us and tell us what you think and how we can even be better. I would say those things.
Well, I'm glad that we appear to be fighting back, though, and that I think we've seen in these brief 100 days that capitulating does you no good.
Can I say one more thing?
Yes.
Maria Reza, who was here for our amazing GBH Media Summit, and she was on your air too, said something at the Media Summit. She said, courage is contagious. And I think there is really something to that.
So we should show up on Monday, is that what you're saying?
Please show up on Monday.
Fine, we will. Susan Goldberg, thank you very much. Please stay in touch. Susan
Thank you
Goldberg,
very
head of
much for
GBH.
joining us. I very much appreciate it.